At Propel, we're interested in how we can turn knowledge into shared resource for the development sector. Key questions we deal with are what should learning look like in practice? How do organizations and teams actually do learning? And what can we learn about learning from people working in complex contexts? With this podcast, we want to bring together experiences and reflections in one place and hopefully offer inspiration to others. So this is our first recording. My name is Sarah from Propel, one of the co-founders of Propel, and today I'm joined by Abdel-Rahman, who is an international development executive and consultant and works with his consultancy Medef Consult and now also with Rios Partners, and who has been in different positions in and around this field, but can also tell us about that himself in a bit. And together we worked on embedding learning and structured learning in the Sudanese Civil Society today study, and that's what our topic will be for today. After having like a recent session on how teams can capture lessons and integrate learning into ongoing workflows, we wanted to use the space to dive a bit deeper into the story that Abdurrahman is bringing with him today and to zoom in how this looks like in practice. So before we dive into the actual study and learning itself, I want to welcome you, Abdurrahman, and also hand over to you to just introduce yourself a little bit.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks a lot, Sarah, for making this happen, this long-awaited podcast that we've been working on. So I'm Abdel-Rahman El-Mahdi, as you mentioned, and I come from Sudan, working in the development field for over 15 years so far. And then like you mentioned, I'm just interested in always improving my own learning, the organizational learning, and so working together with you at Propel gave me a chance to actually do that. But yeah, I mean, this is me. I can go on about me and some of the work I've done, but I'd rather get into the podcast and what we're here to talk about.
Maybe you can take us back a bit to the beginning of the study, or even a little bit before, what was happening maybe in Sudan at the time, what was the study trying to understand, and then, what was happening around it, what about the context that was complex or changing and made learning important?
So the story has two streams to it, I think. One stream is what's going on in my country, in Sudan, the conflict, having had to move out of Sudan at some point because of the conflict, and then getting assigned or ending up with a contract with GIZ for some work that they were doing regarding Sudan and supporting civil society, and then landing that contract and doing the integrating the learning piece into it. And then the second stream of my story is, I think, with Propel, Sarah. It's just, the relationship that we had with Propel, I think, in its early stages, even before the war, just when the
Yeah.
app was being launched. And you were testing or looking for organizations to test that out with. And Sudia was the organization I was heading at the time, was one of these partners that you selected to actually do the testing of the app. And so I think it's interesting or nice that there's two strands to the story where doing the contract with GIZ and trying to integrate the learning piece also brings to it okay, so a reflection from something that I had before even we ended up with that contract with GIZ, which is, there's something called Propel, which then that gave me an entry point, I think, into the contract itself. And I think it was, in writing the proposal itself for the bid that we submitted, I think just having been through Propel before and introduced to it made that learning part of the proposal really quite solid. So going back to the other strand of the story, which is Sudan and the GIZ study. So basically this was a call for proposals by GIZ for a program that they were doing targeting Sudanese civil society, and they were looking for a partner, a company, or a service provider to actually do a study on the state of Sudanese civil society after the conflict in the diasporas and in Sudan itself. So using my company MedEv Consult, which does these kind of assignments, we developed our bid for the work to deliver the work with a team of about 3 other consultants, and a learning component integrated into the bid. And sure enough, our bid was successful, and we ended up delivering the assignment with the learning component that we'll talk about today.
So that's true, actually. That yeah, we piloted Propel. That was now quite some time ago, but indeed that was in the very beginning. And yeah, we learned a lot together there already what learning can look like. So it goes way back. So I'm also really happy that we got to work on this bit together. And one part that I'm interested in also, before we kind of go to what it looked like then during the study, is also, you know, you managed to kind of integrate the idea of learning also right from the start, which is, I would say, not the most common thing yet in the sector, but I would say is quite useful to make this case for why is learning important even before a project is started, right? And so that was quite in a way, novel approach to also just write it into the proposal. I remember us working on this, yeah, learning brief, learning note, also from the beginning to kind of make the case for it. Like, how did you come up with that, and why did you sort of think it was important to put learning quite high on the agenda for the study? What was your reasoning behind doing that?
Yeah, I think learning, the appreciation for learning one grows on you, on the person. So as you continuously do it or think about it, it grows on you, and then you really think about it in every aspect of not just the work you do, but even your daily life. With that specific project, um, at the same time that I was developing that bit, I was working on another project with another consultancy firm as a consultant. And in that project, there was, in the terms of reference and the proposal they had submitted, that we would be looking at some learning, doing some learning on the evaluation that we were delivering. And so in reflecting about that, I mean, they were at the same time. The learning in that other project that I was working on, was very superficial. It was the team leader at the time really didn't have a real sense of how to go about it, and it was just kind of a latch on at the end of the main work of the evaluation we were doing. It wasn't well thought out. I think it could have been done better, and so that coincided with the same time I was developing our bid. And so with that in mind, I said, okay, in the terms of reference for the GIZ bid, it talks about knowledge management and learning. And so I didn't want to just give it like a latch on or kind of window dressing for that. So
Yeah.
that's how I thought, okay, and reflected on that Propel app that we picked up about a few years back and the work we did with Propel when it was launching, and said, hey, maybe this is something we can do in a structured way. And I also had an agenda through that learning, and we'll get to that when you get to the learning questions, and we talk a little bit about the learning questions we set up for the project.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, one challenge that I definitely recognize that you mentioned is like this, yeah, is sort of superficial learning, or yeah, just, it's nice to talk about learning, but what does it actually mean, and how does it feel when it really works? And so that's what I, yeah, want to go to now, to kind of the learning challenge part of, okay, this is all really nice and sounds very nice and fluffy, and I think everyone can get on board that, learning is important, but then what? And that's of course where a lot of people get stuck, and what we also want to focus on today. How do you actually then make this practical, and really make sure that it's embedded in the workflows that are already ongoing? Because, of course, also in this case, the study team had a lot to do. They were also on the ground in Sudan in different places, and sometimes maybe not the easiest environments to navigate, a lot of stakeholders to involve. And then to also think about, okay, what are we learning along the way is, yeah, oftentimes still, this extra, or at least perceived extra. And so a lot of times learning is maybe easier said than done.
And I think there's two sides to it from my experience so far. It's easier said than done. So first is the doing it, so doing it right. And then the second part is applying it. It's easier for me. It seems now easier done than applied. Because I'm getting through
Yeah,
and becoming really good at the doing it. But then the second hurdle is okay, applying it. I think applying your learning to whatever you're doing. And I think so. There's two stages that anyone who's really serious about learning needs to master, which is the doing it and then the applying it. And I think with Propel and the work we've done so far together, Sarah, is we're really good at the doing, and I think the next hurdle to really master is the application.
so doing
But
you would refine as the, generating lessons, capturing lessons, and then the second part applying is kind of connecting it to next decisions, or how would you define that?
yeah, I think it's connecting it to decisions. It's connecting it to the actual workflows that you're actually
Mm,
doing, and yeah, and just putting the learning into practice. So what you've
yeah,
learned, so how is it being applied? Because it's one thing to learn something and capture it, but then you can always go back to the same routine that you're doing without really applying the learning that
yeah,
you've captured. But
that's
yeah,
true.
but
And
going right, right.
that's a whole, yeah, I think a whole other debate about, calling it lessons learned. Can you really call it learning if there is no change that happened from it? Or can you really call it a lesson learned past tense if it wasn't actually applied yet? So it's an interesting discussion that we don't want to go into too much now, but maybe we can pick it up. Yeah, I want to see it, like this difference
Yeah,
come back also, because I think we'll now first focus on the doing part.
yeah.
And then maybe towards the end, we can also have a look at, okay, what now? What does that mean for the applying part?
Okay, so going back to the main question that you said, which is, or the what happened in terms of the learning questions and the themes, was when we developed the learning agenda or the learning questions for myself and the consultancy firm I'm leading. The more important or the questions I was trying to get at is um, for example, in that specific study, is what can we learn in doing a study like that about implementing a study in a conflict setting with civil society in an environment that's unstable, that's insecure. So it was more of building knowledge and learning so that when we do end up with, for example, another assignment in another similar context, we know how to go about implementing it. So it was more geared towards the firm and us and picking up on learning on how we work together in a setting like this, in a study like this, and so forth. But then when we started engaging with our client, they wanted more. They wanted the learning to focus on the themes and issues that they had uh, that they were working on. So it wasn't learning about how you do a study like that. It was learning about how is civil society dealing with the disruptions happening, or how are gender issues integrated into the work of civil society in Sudan that are now working. So there was some sort of tension there between the two agendas that we had. But at the end, we had to kind of yield to the client's agenda because they are the client overall, and they had specific learning agendas or questions they preferred to answer. So yeah, that was the tension there in terms of setting up the learning questions.
That's true. And I mean, we had like this, I remember this workshop and some sessions together to actually come up with the learning questions and then validate them, where there was quite some engagement from, I think, uh, everyone in the team, the client team and the consultancy team, which was great to kind of bring it all together. And of course, there we already started using Propel a little bit to just bring it into one space. Um, and I mean, that was indeed our starting point, of course, also to then see, okay, and now how do we generate insights around these learning questions that we have. So it was, in a way, I would say, like a parallel process to the study process that we started, but with connecting points, of what you were doing as the study team and how learning was generated, and then also trying to find moments to reflect on what was actually learned and what we can do with that for the study team, but also the project team moving forward. And I mean, I think you had some like interesting examples also of how you then went about that with your team to kind of generate these the insights and lessons around these questions, because of course the questions were then there, and then it was okay, and now how do we document what is actually coming up from the field and from the experiences?
Yeah.
What are some examples of how you went about this? And I think it also evolved a little bit over time, right? Where we had a plan and then had to find different ways of how to actually do it though on the ground.
Yeah, no, I thought that was quite interesting how we went about. So yeah, initially, if I recall correctly, we had said that we set up the Propel accounts and we had the learning questions set up, and then the people capturing the learning were supposed to, with the team I had, were supposed to log in and do the reflections on the Propel app as they worked. And for some time that didn't happen. I think for some consultants or some
Yeah.
researchers, as they're working in the field, they get caught up with the work and getting introduced to another application that they need to kind of master and work with might be a bit of a challenge. And so we weren't getting much, but then and then we said let's try and capture the learning on their part, so they don't have to actually log on to the app and fill in the information themselves. And so what I ended up doing was posing the learning questions in just like we're doing now, having a chat, taking notes, even recording the conversation or the exchange we had. So we would sit in the morning before we
I
we
think that
went
was
out to
over
work.
breakfast, yeah.
Yeah. It was over breakfast, and in some ways it became a feature of our breakfast in the morning, and they looked forward to it. They're like, okay,
Hmm.
what are we talking about this morning? It's just because they're eating and there's time and we can have a chit chat. So might as
Yeah.
well focus on some of the learnings we picked up from the work we've been doing in the field, and reflect that on the learning questions. And so we were doing that. So I would ask, about the learning questions, and they would just talk. And I had my voice recorder on and record that. And at the end of the day, we worked together, I think, Sarah, where I sent that voice recording to you, and
Yeah.
then we used, I think, some kind of transcription app or AI to transcript the notes from that, make sense of them, and then feed them into the learning questions into Propel. And I think that worked much better, especially when you have quite a few people that you want to capture the learning, because not everyone's going to get into the app and start typing up their reflections,
Yeah.
writing.
No, indeed, I think that was a really interesting process. Yeah, and indeed, you provided me with the materials, and then I went on to transcribing. I think it was also interesting and a bit challenging because sometimes it was in different languages. There was like English and then a little bit of Arabic in there, and so I tried to bring it together. But then it worked indeed quite well to feed, those insights into the shared space and to connect those insights then to the learning questions that we already had, right? I mean, you used them a little bit also as the guiding, I think, points to have conversations around, but that's then also how we put those insights together in Propel. And it was quite, yeah, interesting to see those insights then grow around this as you were actually out and about doing the study.
Yeah, and I think for also, and it was also interesting to see how, I think looking at the threads and the connections made on the app, how some
Mm,
of the questions connected and the comments coming in, it kind of I think pulling it all together in one place where you can see it is not something that happens all the time. So this is something that was different for me in capturing the learning and then compiling it in one space so that you can actually make sense of it. Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, there we also then had some different streams along with it, right? So on the one hand, we kind of had the study team who was out doing stakeholder engagement interviews. You were doing the actual data collection for the study, and along that process, kind of continuously reflecting on what you were seeing, learning, experiencing along the way. Those were kind of these breakfast conversations. But then we also said, okay, how do we bring this then to the project team or program team of the client
Yeah,
and actually sit together and see what are new things emerging, how to reflect on this together. And then we established these, I think they were monthly or bi-monthly reflection sessions with everyone to look at these emerging insights and like these trends that you're talking about.
yeah, yeah. No, we did that. We did that every bi-monthly. We had a meeting that brought us together as the study team and the client and some of the programming team um, to look at some of the questions, the learning questions, share what we had up to then, and then also take some of what they had and some of their reflections on the learning questions. So yeah, I think there's two. We were doing it on these two different levels. On the second one, though, I would say reflection I'm having now is that the consistency of the programming team
Yeah,
on the other side who joins us. So, for example, on the second we had like I think three such meetings because the time duration was quite short. It was a 6 months assignment. And we were doing
yeah,
them every
that's
two
true.
months, so we just had three meetings with the programming team, and there was only one person, and if I remember, who was consistently in all three meetings.
Mm,
So the first meeting, it's like they're grappling to understand what's going on. Second meeting, they're actually reflecting and generating learning.
yeah,
But then someone new comes on the second meeting, and they're just getting on board now. So you really don't get much out of them until the third meeting, and by that
yeah,
time, if they left. So I think with these kind of that second strand of how you generate the learning with the across both the study team and the client or the programming team, consistency is quite important
mm.
from the start, especially if you're working in a very short duration to try and capture these learnings.
Do
So
you
and the
think
longer
this
you have them.
consistency can be built from the start or that it just needs more time?
No, I think it can be built from the start. I think it's how you design the learning. So who's going to be in the learning?
Mm,
So I think with the client or the programming team, I would say, listen, let's identify a few of your team members who will be there and who will be there throughout the learning sessions, rather than have random people come in and come out. I mean, because I think to generate consistent learning from the reflections, you need someone consistently. You know,
yeah,
um, you remember, remember we have people coming in and really not, what's this app, or just a minute,
yeah,
what's this, what are these learning questions, how did they come about, so if you
that's
have
true.
someone
Yeah.
who's on board from the start all the way to the end, I think it's much more better and you get more out of the team.
And what were maybe other like what do you see as obstacles or and supporting factors for this learning process? Like, yeah, we mentioned now some obstacles, consistency, maybe also, yeah, like the time to invest in like getting to know a new way of doing learning. What are other obstacles or then also supporting factors that could make this easier and could actually help with integrating these kind of learning
i,
moments?
I would say supporting factors, if if you were a team leader, might be that because sometimes you have reflections on learning questions outside a session. So
Mm,
we might be having a session scheduled at 2 where we're going to talk, but you know, some of my best reflections come in the morning at 5 a.m. in the morning when I, doing my morning walk around one of the specific questions. I don't make a note of that. I try to make a mental note of that so that I can share it later at the session, for example, when we're together. But it might not happen. So I think, from my experience, if you really want to be a guru at learning, is you have to capture these awkward times that you might get a reflection on your learning and be able to capture that and then bring it into the system or into the room when you actually do convene with the team. So that's one thing. And interestingly enough, with the group I'm working with at Rios, we had a reflection on some of these thoughts. And, I said, we have all this tech and these voice apps. So you're taking the walk in the morning and you get a reflection or aha moment, capture it, put a voice note on it, and then send it to whatever, if Sarah's capturing the learnings, if it's the meeting next door, or you're keeping it for your own record. So I think supporting things is being able to be alert to when you might be having thoughts and learnings and reflections, and then being able to capture it. I think also the other thing is, with one more thing, with the team, on the programming team on the other side of the client side, all of our meetings actually were virtual. But if you do have occasionally the opportunity to meet in person, that's catalytic to the learning. It's not, I mean, it helps a lot, because when we were doing our reflection sessions in the morning in the breakfast, they were really alive, and it wasn't just about here's the learning. We argued sometimes about some of the issues that came up, so I think occasionally it would be good to kind of get together in person, face to face, and do the reflections and the learning together.
Definitely. Also, definitely share this experience. I mean, this, of course, that's something you have to find a way to accommodate both, because a lot of people are all over the place. Also, in this case, I mean, the process um included also connecting people in different places, which was nice, of course, to have the opportunity to connect virtually. But I agree, a lot of times these real connections then also emerge from in-person get-togethers. And the voice recording, I think that's an interesting point, something that we're also thinking a lot about at Propel, how to make that easier. I mean, even myself, I personally sometimes, send myself a WhatsApp or Slack message with a voice recording, just as I have a thought that I need to remember later. There, the only thing that I see is that, we kind of have to be careful not to just generate a lot of data, and then they become like, all these sunset pictures on your camera roll. They're like nice to have, and you think you will come back to look at these beautiful moments that you have, but in the end, will you really go back and look at these voice recordings or pictures again? And so, just to find then a way of, okay, what do you do with all of these points that you captured? Just taking that, like putting a pin in this note there, because also looking at the time, one thing that I do want to turn to now, also with the obstacles and supporting factors that you mentioned, to come back to kind of this question that we had in the beginning, the part of, okay, doing the learning, where now we talked through some examples that we had here, but then also the applying it. Because, I mean, of course, we try to do this a bit throughout this process, to say, okay, let's use this always as a stepping stone, each team reflection as a stepping stone, to look at what do we know already and what does that mean for the future. So what do you think about that, and how could it be done better, or what is needed to then actually connect the learning to the next steps?
It depends on, I think initially it depends on which end you're in. So if you're a consultant delivering for a client, they formulate the learning questions, they have things they want to learn and put into practice, hopefully. And so as a consultant, you might, how to do that properly. How to generate the learning, use the context, like what we just described, the doing part. And then you give the learnings, you capture the learnings, and you pass them on to the client.
Yeah.
and then it's your work is done, and it's up to them to kind of apply that. You might want to take some of these learnings yourself, but I think if you weren't really interested in the learning agenda that was set up from the start, then it's not yours. So it's up to the client.
Mm.
But then I mean, for me, if I was to reflect on the learning that I picked up from the work that I did with that specific project, it's about how to do the learning, what works, what doesn't,
Yeah.
And so, for example, for now, I'm doing another project, and I know how to formulate the learning better into it, and how to build it in better, and design
Yeah.
it. And so that's for me, that's how I'm applying what I learned. Whereas I didn't really have it as a learning question in that previous project. Um, but going into the substance of things, um, yeah, I think it just depends. I mean, again, it just depends on how invested you are as a program lead, as a company, in terms of really bringing about some change in what you do or how you do things. And if you really are serious about bringing about the change, because the learning is a tool or a way to get to that change, I think you'll keep coming back to some of the learnings that you've picked up from that process, and
Mm.
keeping asking yourself the question is, how is this being applied now? How is this being reflected in our systems, or not? You know,
Yeah.
and I think that's where sometimes some people struggle, is that linking it back and keeping it in focus, in the forefront, and saying, okay, so now we're hiring new people. How are we going to
Mm.
design the hiring process in a way that speaks to what came out of that
Yeah.
learning question in terms of equity and hiring in a more different languages, and so forth.
Yeah.
So I think that's where I think most organizations or programs might need some more help
Yeah.
with.
That's a good point, and I think a good closer because we are running out of time. But I want to thank you for this conversation, and yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to reflect on this process with us. And we're very much looking forward to having this published as our first podcast recording.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah.